The seamstress wed a broken widower, only to learn the man she saved was the Duke in disguise. The village of Moor Hollow whispered behind their hands as Maris Thorne made her way down the cobblestone path toward the small cottage at the edge of the woods. Rain fell in gentle sheets, darkening her woolen cloak and the small bundle of belongings she carried. Fingers pointed from doorways, and eyes followed with judgment the seamstress who had agreed to wed the broken widower, a man who had nothing to offer but his grief. "She'll regret it before the month is out," someone murmured loud enough for Maris to hear. "Poor foolish creature," another voice added. Maris kept her chin lifted, though her heart pounded against her ribs. She had made her choice when she had found Rowan Vale collapsed in fever outside her small shop 3 months prior. When he had awakened, something in his hollow eyes had called to her, something that spoke of a depth of suffering she recognized all too well. The cottage door hung slightly ajar, as if uncertain of its welcome. Maris paused before it, her fingers tracing the frayed edges of her shawl. The simple ceremony at the village church had been witnessed only by the vicar and his wife. No one had stood for Rowan. No one had wished them joy. She pushed the door open to find him seated by the hearth, shadows dancing across his gaunt face. His tall frame seemed diminished in the worn armchair, his fingers tracing the edge of a book he was not reading. "You came," he said, his voice rough with disuse. "I made a promise," Maris replied, setting her bundle down. Rowan Vale stood, and for a moment something flashed in his eyes, something that seemed at odds with the shabby surroundings and his simple attire. He moved with a strange innate grace that suggested a life lived in grander halls. "I have prepared a chamber for you," he said, gesturing toward a narrow doorway. "It is yours alone, until we know each other better," Maris finished for him. The marriage was one of convenience and care, not passion. "Not yet. You are kinder than this world deserves," Rowan said, his gaze dropping to the floor. "The world has never concerned itself with what I deserve," she answered. "Why should I judge it differently?" That evening, as Maris prepared a simple meal from the meager provisions in the cottage, she noticed Rowan watching her hands as she worked. His attention was not lecherous, but rather held a curious wonder, as if the ordinary movements of domestic life were foreign to him. "Were you not married before?" she asked, emboldened by the quiet. A shadow crossed his face. "Yes, though it feels as if it were another life, another man." "And who are you now?" Maris asked, setting a bowl before him. Rowan's fingers trembled slightly as he reached for the spoon. "I'm not entirely certain. Perhaps that is why I needed someone to see me, even in this reduced state." The rain intensified outside, drumming against the cottage roof. In the small space between them, something unspoken hovered, the first fragile thread of connection between two souls who had known too much solitude. Later, as Maris lay in her narrow bed, she heard Rowan pacing in the main room, his footsteps too measured, too deliberate for a man of his supposed station, and when he paused outside her door, she held her breath, wondering if he would speak, but he moved away, leaving only the whisper of something unsaid. In the darkness, Maris touched the thimble she wore on a thin cord around her neck, her mother's only legacy. She had married a stranger, a man who carried more secrets than possessions. Yet somehow in his presence, she felt less alone than she had in years. "Who are you, Rowan Vale?" she whispered to the shadows, unaware that the answer would shake the foundations of her carefully ordered world. Dawn broke over Moor Hollow with reluctant light, casting long shadows across the cottage floor. Maris rose early, her fingers already seeking work. She found scraps of fabric in a forgotten corner and began to mend Rowan's threadbare shirt, the needle moving with practiced precision. "Oh, you needn't do that," Rowan's voice came from the doorway, startling her. "It gives my hands purpose," Maris replied, not looking up. "And you are in need of mending." A strange, soft laugh escaped him, perhaps the first she had heard. "Is that what you see? A man to be mended?" "I see what is before me," she answered, finally meeting his gaze. "A man who has forgotten how to live." Rowan crossed the room with that same incongruous grace, taking a seat across from her. His fingers traced an invisible pattern on the wooden table, and Maris noticed a faint mark on his right hand, a circular indentation, as if something had been recently removed. "The villagers believe you have made a grave error in judgment," he said. "The villagers have always found me wanting in judgment," Maris replied, tying off a neat stitch. "First when I refused the butcher's son, then when I insisted on keeping my mother's shop after her passing, and now wedding a penniless widower with nothing to offer but a leaking roof and bitter memories." His tone carried an edge of self-mockery. Maris set down her needle. "Is that all you offer, Rowan?" He looked away, his profile sharp against the morning light. For now it is all I can safely give. The word safely hung between them, laden with unspoken implications. As days passed, they established a quiet routine. Maris would walk to the village to maintain her small seamstress business, returning with whatever provisions she could afford. Rowan would gather firewood, tend to simple repairs around the cottage, but never ventured into the village himself. One evening, as a storm raged outside, Maris found him staring at the fire, a folded paper clutched in his hand. He hastily tucked it away as she entered. "A letter?" she inquired, setting down her wet shawl. "Nothing of consequence," he answered too quickly. That night his nightmares woke her, desperate pleading words in sleep. Maris hesitated at his door, then entered to find him thrashing against invisible bonds. "Rowan," she whispered, touching his shoulder gently. He woke with a violent start, his hand capturing her wrist with unexpected strength. For an instant, his eyes held an authority that seemed to belong to another man entirely. "Forgive me," he murmured, releasing her immediately. "The dreams." "Tell me," Maris said, sitting at the edge of the bed. Rowan's breathing gradually steadied. "I see flames. A carriage overturned. My wife and child." His voice broke. "I could not reach them in time." Maris took his hand, feeling the calluses that seemed too new, as if his hands had only recently known labor. "You survived. There is purpose in that." "What purpose could there be in living half a life?" he asked bitterly. "Perhaps to find the other half," she answered. The next morning Maris returned from an early errand to find a stranger's horse tethered outside their cottage, a magnificent beast that seemed wildly out of place in their humble surroundings. Inside, she heard voices raised in argument. "Your Grace, this charade has gone far enough." An elderly man in formal dress stood facing Rowan, who had gone deathly pale. "Lower your voice, Hollins," Rowan commanded, his tone carrying an unmistakable ring of authority. "The duchy cannot wait forever while you play at being a commoner. The council demands your return, and Lady Seraphine's family grows impatient with your extended mourning period." Maris stood frozen in the doorway, the basket of thread slipping from her fingers. Both men turned at the sound. "Maris," Rowan began, his voice strained. "Your Grace," she echoed, her world tilting on its axis. The elderly man, Hollins, turned to her with a mixture of surprise and dismay. "Dear heavens, who is this woman?" "My wife," Rowan answered, straightening to his full height. For the first time, Maris saw him as he truly was, not a broken widower, but something else entirely, something that belonged to a world she had only glimpsed through the windows of grand carriages passing through the village. "Your wife?" Hollins repeated aghast. "But you cannot possibly—" "Enough!" Rowan's voice filled the small room. "You will show her the respect she is due." Hollins's face paled. "The council must be informed immediately. This changes everything." "Leave us," Rowan commanded, and the authority in his voice brooked no argument. When the door closed behind Hollins, silence descended like a physical weight. Maris stared at the stranger who wore her husband's face. "Who are you?" she asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "I am Rowan Valahart, Duke of Winthorn." The words fell like stones into the stifling silence of the cottage. Maris felt the room spinning around her, the humble widower she had married, the man whose fevered brow she had cooled, whose nightmares she had soothed. A duke. It seemed a cruel jest from a world that had never shown her kindness. "Why?" she managed at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rowan—" "No, the duke," crossed the room with measured steps, stopping just short of touching her. "After the accident, after losing Eleanor and our son, I could not bear the weight of the title, the endless parade of sympathy and expectation. I fled." "Into a lie," Maris said, stepping back from him. "Into a marriage built on falsehood." "Not falsehood," he insisted, his eyes darkening. "I am still the man you knew. The title does not change who I became in grief." Maris wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of her plain dress, her rough hands. "And what of me? Did you think me so desperate that you could play this game with my life?" "It was never a game." His voice grew hoarse with emotion. "When I collapsed at your door, I was as close to death as a man could be without surrendering to it. You saved me, Maris. Not out of duty or advantage, but out of pure compassion." She turned away, unable to meet his gaze. "And now that your steward has found you, what becomes of me, the seamstress who unwittingly married a duke?" Rowan was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, carrying a formality that had been hidden beneath his grief. "The marriage can be annulled quietly. You would be compensated generously, set up with a shop in London if you wished, or a cottage of your own wherever you might choose. The easy dismissal was a knife to her heart. So I am to be bought off and sent away? I would not have you bound to a life you never chose, he replied. Maris looked around the small cottage that had become home, not for its comforts, but for the quiet understanding that had grown between them. And did you not make vows before God? Do they mean nothing now that you have remembered your title? A flash of something like pain crossed his features. They mean everything. But I would not trap you in a world that will judge you mercilessly for your origins. As you have judged me, she challenged, believing me incapable of standing beside a duke. That is not what I meant, Rowan began, but Maris cut him off with a raised hand. I need air, she said, moving toward the door, and time. She fled into the woods behind the cottage, her thoughts in chaos. The trees offered the only sanctuary she had ever known, a place where judgment could not follow. The reality of her situation unfolded before her in all its impossible dimensions. She had married not merely above her station, but into the highest echelons of society. As twilight descended, Maris found herself at the small stream where she had often come to think. Her reflection rippled in the water, a simple woman with nothing to recommend her to the glittering world of the aristocracy. What shall I do? She whispered to the gathering darkness. When she returned to the cottage, she found Rowan, the Duke, standing by the hearth, his back to the door. He had changed into different clothes, garments that had been hidden somewhere in the cottage. The fine cut of his coat, the quality of the fabric, transformed him into someone both familiar and foreign. I must return to Winthorne Hall, he said without turning. The estate has been without its master for too long. I see, Maris said, keeping her voice level despite the ache in her chest. He turned then, his eyes searching her face. Come with me, he said, the words rushing out as if he had been holding them back, not as an obligation, but as my choice. Maris felt her heart leap traitorously. And what would I be at Winthorne Hall? Your mistake, your charity? My Duchess, he answered simply. You cannot mean that, she whispered. Rowan crossed to her, taking her work-roughened hands in his. I have lived two lives now, Maris. One of privilege and duty, another of loss and simplicity. It is only in this second life with you that I have found a reason to continue breathing. She searched his face for deceit, but found only a vulnerability that matched her own. The Tun will never accept me. Then they shall not accept me either, he replied with unexpected firmness. For I will not return without the woman who saved more than my life. She saved my soul. In that moment, with his hands warm around hers and his eyes holding a promise she scarcely dared believe, Maris made her choice. Then I shall come, she said, not as your secret or your shame, but as your equal in all things that matter. The ghost of a smile touched his lips, the first true smile she had seen. My equal in all things, he agreed, though I warn you, your skill with a needle far surpasses mine. Despite everything, a small laugh escaped her. It was a beginning, fragile as a newly threaded stitch, but holding the promise of something that might, in time, become strong enough to withstand the scrutiny of a world determined to pull it apart. The journey to Winthorne Hall commenced at dawn, with a carriage far grander than anything that had ever stopped in Moorhollow. Villagers emerged from their homes, eyes wide with disbelief, as Maris Thorne, the humble seamstress, stepped into the ducal conveyance beside a man they barely recognized, Rowan Veilhart, Duke of Winthorne, standing tall and commanding in attire befitting his station. They will talk of this for generations, Maris murmured as the carriage door closed. Let them, Rowan replied, his hand finding hers. Perhaps it will give them hope that life contains more possibilities than they imagined. As the carriage pulled away from the cottage that had sheltered their brief simple marriage, Maris felt a strange tightening in her chest. That small dwelling had witnessed the birth of something genuine between them, something she feared might not survive transplantation to grander soil. Tell me of Winthorne, she requested, her fingers unconsciously smoothing the worn fabric of her dress. Rowan's gaze grew distant. It has been in my family for 10 generations. 300 rooms, grounds that stretch beyond what the eye can see in a day's walk. He paused, noticing her expression. It is not the grandeur that matters, Maris. It is the responsibility. For the land, the tenants, for everything and everyone under Winthorne's protection, he confirmed. My father taught me that a title without service is merely decoration. The journey stretched through the day, the landscape gradually transforming from humble villages to increasingly manicured countryside. With each passing mile, Maris observed subtle changes in Rowan, his posture becoming more formal, his gaze more measured. The broken widower receded and the Duke emerged. You are different already, she observed quietly. Rowan's eyes met hers. "Am I? You carry yourself as if the weight has returned to your shoulders." He took her hand again, his thumb tracing the calluses on her palm. "Then I shall need your strength all the more." As twilight descended, they crested a hill, and Winthorne Hall appeared in the valley below, a magnificent stone edifice with countless windows ablaze with light, surrounded by formal gardens and ancient oaks. Maris felt her breath catch in her throat. "It looks like something from a dream," she whispered. "It can be a beautiful dream or a gilded cage," Rowan replied. "The choice has always been in how one lives within its walls." The carriage wheels crunched on the gravel drive, and Maris saw a small gathering of servants assembled on the steps, their expressions a mixture of relief and barely concealed curiosity. At their head stood Hollands Kerr, the elderly steward, who had discovered them in the cottage. "His Grace returns," Hollands announced formally as the carriage door opened, "and Her Grace, the Duchess of Winthorne." The title fell strangely upon Maris's ears, like clothing several sizes too large. She felt Rowan's steadying hand at her elbow as she descended from the carriage, conscious of the scrutiny of every eye. "Prepare the Duchess's chambers," Rowan commanded, "and send word to Madame Levesque in the morning. We shall require her services immediately." "Already done, Your Grace," Hollands replied, "though perhaps I might have a private word regarding certain expectations." "Tomorrow," Rowan said firmly. "Tonight we rest." The entrance hall of Winthorne dwarfed the entire cottage they had left behind. Marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, and ancient portraits gazed down from walls covered in rich silk. Maris fought the urge to shrink beneath their painted stairs. "Your ancestors?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. "Generations of Valehearts," Rowan confirmed, looking rather disapproving, I fear. "They have cause," she said softly. "I am hardly what they would have chosen for their line." Rowan stopped before a particularly stern-looking gentleman in ermine-trimmed robes. "This is my great-grandfather, the 9th Duke. He married a brewer's daughter and scandalized society." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "The Valehearts have a history of following their hearts despite convention." A young maid approached, curtsying deeply. "If it pleases your Grace, I've been assigned to attend the Duchess." Maris started at the title, then gathered herself. "What is your name?" "Lily, your Grace," the girl replied, eyes fixed on the floor. "Lily," Maris repeated. "I look forward to your guidance. I fear I have much to learn." The maid glanced up in surprise, clearly not expecting such an admission from her new mistress. Rowan's hand brushed Maris's sleeve. "Rest well. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges." As Lily led her through corridors and up staircases, Maris felt the enormity of the change in her circumstances pressing upon her. The Duchess's chambers were a suite of rooms larger than the entire village shop where she had spent her life. Delicate furnishings, silk hangings, and a bed that could have slept 5, all alien to her experience. "Shall I help you undress, Your Grace?" Lily asked. Yes," Maris replied, unfamiliar with being attended in such an intimate manner. As the maid carefully removed her simple garments, Maris caught sight of herself in a full-length mirror, a stranger in an unknown land. "The bath is prepared whenever you wish, Your Grace," Lily continued, "and there are nightclothes laid out." When the girl had gone, Maris sank onto the edge of the enormous bed, her fingers finding the thimble she wore around her neck. It had been her anchor in a world where she had known her place. Now adrift in luxury, it remained the only tangible connection to the woman she had been just that morning. "Who am I to be here?" she whispered to the silent room. There was no answer, but the distant ticking of a grandfather clock, measuring out the seconds of her new existence as Duchess of Winthorne. Maris awoke to unfamiliar birdsong and the gentle rustling of curtains being drawn back. Sunlight streamed across a bed larger than any she had known, momentarily disorienting her before memory rushed back. "Good morning, Your Grace," Lily said, bobbing a curtsy. "His Grace requests your company for breakfast in the morning room. When you are ready." "Ready." The word took on monumental significance as Maris surveyed the options before her. Her own dresses, pitifully few and woefully inadequate, had been pressed and laid out, but beside them hung a simple gown of soft blue that had not been there the night before. "His Grace had it brought from the late Duchess's rooms," Lily explained, noticing her gaze, "until Madame Levesque can attend to a proper wardrobe." The thought of wearing his first wife's clothing sent a chill through Mary. "I shall wear my own dress," she decided, however humble. Dressed and with her hair arranged simply by her own hands, despite Lily's offers of assistance, Maris followed the maid through the labyrinthine corridors of Winthorne Hall. Servants paused in their duties to bow or curtsy as she passed, their eyes following her with undisguised curiosity. The morning room overlooked terraced gardens, still glistening with dew. Rowan stood at the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the light, once again the very picture of aristocratic bearing. He turned as she entered, and for an instant, something like uncertainty flickered in his eyes. "You did not accept the gown," he observed. "I thought it better to remain myself," Maris replied, "however ill-suited to these surroundings." His expression softened. "You are never ill-suited, Maris, though perhaps unaccustomed." Breakfast was served by silent footmen who materialized and vanished with practiced efficiency. Maris found herself counting the pieces of silver beside her plate, marveling at the delicacy of the china. "Hollands has drawn up a preliminary schedule," Rowan said, unfolding a paper beside his plate. "Madame Levesque arrives at 10 for fittings, followed by Mrs. Penworth, who will guide you through the household accounts and staff management." "All today?" Maris asked, a note of alarm in her voice. "Society will not wait long before curiosity drives them to our door," he replied. "We must prepare you as swiftly as possible." "Prepare me," she echoed, "like a lamb for slaughter." Rowan set down his cup with deliberate care, like a duchess, for her rightful place. A clock chimed somewhere in the vast house, and Rowan rose. "I must meet with my steward and review the estate affairs I've neglected. Will you be comfortable with the arrangements I've made?" Maris nodded, though comfort was the furthest thing from her mind. Madame Levesque arrived precisely at 10, a Frenchwoman of indeterminate age with sharp eyes and sharper pins. She circled Maris like a hawk assessing its prey. "The posture is good," she pronounced. "The hands—" She lifted Maris's work-roughened fingers with barely concealed dismay. "We shall need long gloves for the immediate engagements." For the next 2 hours, Maris stood as a living mannequin, while fabrics were draped, measured, and pinned around her. Silks and velvets in jewel tones, lawns and muslins for morning wear, riding habits and walking dresses, an entire existence defined through clothing. "And for the evening presentation, I think the emerald silk with silver embroidery," Madame Levesque decided. "It will make a statement, yes?" "What statement would that be?" Maris asked, exhaustion creeping into her voice. The Frenchwoman's eyes glittered. "That the new Duchess of Winthorne is not afraid to shine." Mrs. Penworth followed, a stately housekeeper with iron-grey hair and a manner that suggested she had seen far stranger things than a seamstress elevated to duchess. She presented Maris with household keys, ledgers, staff rotations, and meal plans, with brisk efficiency. "The household runs on precision, Your Grace," she explained, "though naturally you may wish to make changes once you've settled." "I would not wish to disrupt what works well," Maris replied cautiously. Something like approval flashed in Mrs. Penworth's eyes. "A wise approach, if I may say so, Your Grace." By late afternoon, Maris's head swam with information, which salons required fresh flowers daily, which staff reported to whom, the proper sequence for formal dinner service, which local families must be received first. She retreated to the Duchess's garden, a walled sanctuary of herbs and flowering shrubs, seeking a moment's peace. There, seated on a stone bench, she found Hollands Kerr consulting a leather-bound volume. "Your Grace," he said, rising quickly when he noticed her, "forgive the intrusion." "It is I who intrude," Maris replied. "Please be seated." The elderly steward hesitated, then resumed his place. "I was reviewing the family records. There are certain matters of precedent that may be helpful." "Precedent for a duke marrying so far beneath his station?" Maris asked with quiet directness. Hollands's weathered face betrayed nothing. "Precedent for unexpected unions that proved fortunate for the Valahart line." He opened the volume to a marked page. "The 9th Duke's wife, a brewer's daughter, as His Grace may have mentioned, brought innovation to the estate's agricultural practices that doubled its yield within 5 years. The 7th Duchess was a physician's daughter who established the hospital that still serves the county." Maris studied the neat entries of births, marriages, and achievements. "You seek to reassure me." "I seek to remind myself, Your Grace, that Winthorne has thrived most when its masters chose partners who brought more than bloodlines to their union." Hollands closed the book carefully. "His Grace was lost after the accident. I feared we had lost him entirely, yet he returns with you, and there is life in his eyes again." Maris felt a lump form in her throat. "I am not certain I belong in this world, Mr. Kerr. If I may be permitted to speak plainly, Your Grace, none of us begins belonging. We grow into our places." He rose, bowing formally. "And I believe you may grow into yours more naturally than you imagine." As twilight descended, Maris made her way back through the gardens, contemplating Hollands's words. At the terrace steps, she found Rowan waiting, his face lined with the fatigue of a day spent reconciling with responsibilities long abandoned. "Was it terrible?" he asked, offering his arm. "Educational," she replied, accepting it. "And yours?" "The estate survived my absence better than I deserved." His voice carried a note of self-reproach. "My tenants deserved more attentive care." They walked in silence through the deepening shadows, the great house looming before them like a mountain to be scaled. "Do you regret coming?" Rowan asked suddenly. Maris considered the question with honesty. "I regret nothing that has brought us to this moment," she answered, "though I fear what may come after." His hand covered hers where it rested on his arm. "Then we shall face it together, one moment at a time." The invitation arrived precisely 1 week after their return to Winthorne Hall, engraved on heavy cream paper, the seal of the Countess of Barrowmere pressed into dark blue wax. Maris turned it over in her hands, the weight of it seemingly greater than its physical substance. "A supper and musicale," Rowan explained, reading over her shoulder. "Lady Barrowmere wastes no time in satisfying her curiosity." "Will there be many guests?" Maris asked, unable to keep the apprehension from her voice. "Enough to constitute a proper examination of the new Duchess," he replied with a hint of bitterness. "Though Caroline Barrowmere is less vicious than some, her invitation is likely a combination of genuine welcome and strategic advantage in being first to present us." In the days since their arrival at Winthorne, Maris had undergone a transformation that, while external, had begun to affect her sense of self. Madame Levesque's promised wardrobe had materialized with astonishing speed, morning dresses, walking ensembles, and evening wear that somehow managed to be both fashionable and suited to Maris's simpler tastes. Her hands, though still bearing the marks of her former occupation, were now regularly gloved in soft kid leather. Her hair, arranged each morning by Lily, was styled in a manner both elegant and unobtrusive. Yet beneath these trappings of nobility, she remained the seamstress of Moorhollow, observing, measuring, and adapting with the precision that had once guided her needle. "I shall need guidance," she admitted, setting the invitation on the breakfast table. "I have never attended such an event." "You will have little to do but be observed," Rowan assured her. "Lady Barrowmere's musicales are primarily showcases for her daughter's mediocre talents at the pianoforte, interspersed with sufficient food and gossip to make the torture endurable." Despite his light tone, Maris recognized the concern behind his eyes. "You fear how I will be received." Rowan's expression grew serious. "I fear how deeply the barbs may cut, though they will be disguised as pleasantries. Society has refined cruelty to an art form." "Then I shall be prepared," Maris said with more confidence than she felt. "After all, I have faced the disapproval of Moorhollow for years. How much worse can the ton be?" The answer came 3 nights later, as their carriage joined the elegant procession approaching Barrowmere House. Maris sat beside Rowan, her heart beating painfully against her ribs despite the calming effect of the emerald silk gown Madame Levesque had created. Her mother's thimble rested beneath the bodice, a talisman against the evening ahead. "Remember," Rowan said quietly, "you are the Duchess of Winthorne. No one present outranks you except the Marchioness of Halewood, should she attend, and she is nearly deaf." Despite the gravity of the moment, Maris felt a small smile touch her lips, a fortunate disability when confronted with impertinence. Rowan's hand covered hers. "There is the spirit that will see you through." The entrance hall of Barrowmere House glittered with candlelight reflected in mirrors and the jewels adorning the assembled guests. Conversation dimmed momentarily as the butler announced them, His Grace, the Duke of Winthorne, and Her Grace, the Duchess of Winthorne, then swelled again with an undercurrent of heightened interest. Their hostess advanced, a handsome woman of middle years, her smile practiced but not entirely insincere. "Rowan, my dear boy, how we have missed you in society." Her gaze shifted to Maris, assessment barely concealed beneath her welcome. "And this is your new Duchess. How refreshing." "Lady Barrowmere, may I present my wife, Maris?" Rowan replied formally. "Your Grace," Maris said, executing the curtsy she had practiced countless times under Mrs. Penworth's critical eye. "Such lovely posture," Lady Barrowmere observed. "One would hardly know," she caught herself. "That is, one is always pleased to welcome new blood into our little circle. Do come in. Everyone is most eager to make your acquaintance." The everyone in question proved to be a glittering assembly of aristocratic faces, all turning with varying degrees of subtlety to inspect the newcomer in their midst. Maris felt herself being measured against an invisible standard, Her gown, her hair, her manner of speech, even the way she accepted a glass of champagne from a passing footman. "Your Grace," a silken voice interrupted her thoughts. "What a pleasure to finally meet you." Maris turned to find herself facing a striking blonde woman whose perfect features were arranged in an expression of polite interest. Something in her pale blue eyes, however, suggested a predator assessing its prey. "Lady Seraphine Gloyne," the woman introduced herself. "I was most surprised to hear of Rowan's marriage. We had all thought him lost to grief for so long." "Sometimes what seems lost may simply be finding its way home by a different path," Maris replied carefully. Lady Seraphine's perfect eyebrow arched slightly. "How poetic. Were you acquainted with the late Duchess?" "I was not," Maris admitted. "A pity. Eleanor was the very model of aristocratic grace. Her family connections alone ensured her welcome in the highest circles." Lady Seraphine sipped her champagne delicately. "One wonders how you shall manage without such advantages." The barb was delivered with such precision that Maris might have admired the craftsmanship had it not been aimed at her heart. Before she could formulate a response that would not betray her discomfort, Rowan appeared at her side. "Lady Seraphine," he acknowledged coolly, "I see you've met my wife." "Indeed, Your Grace. We were just discussing the challenges of entering society so abruptly." Her smile never wavered. "I've offered my assistance, should the Duchess require guidance in navigating our particular waters." "My wife navigates by her own moral compass," Rowan replied, his voice carrying an edge that caused nearby conversations to falter. "I find it infinitely more reliable than the shifting winds of fashion or favor." A flush of color touched Lady Seraphine's cheeks. "How fortunate for her, and for you." As she moved away, Maris released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I believe I've made an enemy." "Seraphine's family had hopes of an alliance after a suitable mourning period," Rowan explained quietly. "My disappearance frustrated those plans. My return with a wife shattered them entirely." The remainder of the evening unfolded like an elaborate dance, for which Maris knew only half the steps. She was presented to countesses and baronets, generals' wives and politicians' daughters, each interaction a delicate negotiation between her natural dignity and her unfamiliarity with the social code. During supper, she found herself seated beside an elderly gentleman whose rheumy eyes regarded her with surprising kindness. "Lord Pemberton," he introduced himself. "Don't mind all the staring. They'll find something new to gossip about by next week." "Is that how long interest typically lasts?" Maris asked with a small smile. "Unless you provide them with fresh scandal," he chuckled. "Though marrying Winthorne has already set them buzzing like disturbed bees." As the guests assembled for the promised musical performance, Maris caught fragments of whispered conversations. "A seamstress, if you can imagine. Wonder what enchantment she worked on poor Rowan. Scarcely knows which fork to use." Each remark was a tiny cut, none fatal alone but accumulating toward a death by 1,000 social wounds. Yet when she caught Rowan's gaze across the room, steady, unwavering in his support, she found strength to lift her chin and face the scrutiny with grace. Later, as their carriage rolled homeward through the night, Maris finally allowed her shoulders to sag with the release of tension. "You were magnificent," Rowan said softly. "I was terrified," she confessed, "yet you never showed it." He took her gloved hand in his. "That is the essence of true nobility, Maris, not blood or breeding, but the courage to face adversity with dignity intact." In the darkness of the carriage, with only moonlight illuminating their faces, Maris felt something shift between them, a deepening of respect, perhaps, or the first tentative reaching toward something that might, in time, become love. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now, having survived the first skirmish," Rowan replied, "we prepare for the war." The weeks following their introduction to society brought a deluge of invitations to Winthorne Hall. Morning calls, garden parties, dinners and balls, each representing another opportunity for the ton to assess the unprecedented union of a duke and a seamstress. Maris faced each encounter with growing confidence, though the strain of constant scrutiny often left her exhausted by day's end. One particularly trying afternoon found her retreating to the Duchess's garden, seeking solace among the herbs and roses that offered neither judgment nor whispered commentary. There, she discovered a weathered stone bench partially hidden behind a trellis of climbing roses, a perfect sanctuary. "I wondered where you might have escaped to," Rowan's voice came from behind her. "Mrs. Penworth said you'd declined Lady Meryton's invitation for tea." Maris did not turn. "I could not face another hour of veiled insults disguised as compliments." Rowan settled beside her on the bench, his formal attire incongruous among the untamed greenery. "You've managed admirably thus far." "Have I?" She finally met his gaze. "Each day I feel more like an imposter waiting to be exposed. Last night at the Halverstons, I used the wrong spoon for the soup course, and Lady Seraphine's smile could have cut glass." "The wrong spoon," Rowan echoed with gentle mockery. "Truly the empire shall fall." Despite herself, Maris felt a smile tug at her lips. "When you say it aloud, it does sound rather absurd." "Because it is absurd," he insisted. "These tiny rules and markers exist solely to distinguish those who belong from those who must be kept out. They have nothing to do with one's character or worth." Maris studied his face, struck by the intensity of his conviction. "You speak as if you've always stood outside these rules yourself." Something flickered in his eyes. "Perhaps I have in my own way, even before I fled." The unspoken grief hung between them. His first wife, his child, the life he had abandoned in his despair. They rarely spoke of it directly, circling the subject like moths around a flame, aware of the danger but drawn nonetheless. "Tell me about her," Maris said suddenly. "About Eleanor?" Rowan stiffened, clearly surprised by the request. "Why would you wish to know?" "Because she is part of who you are," Maris answered simply. "And because the tongue whispers comparisons I cannot defend against when I know nothing of the woman I supposedly fail to measure up to." For a long moment, Rowan was silent, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon visible above the garden wall. When he spoke at last, his voice was low and measured. "Eleanor Montclair was the daughter of the Earl of Sheffington. We were betrothed from childhood, a perfect match of bloodlines and fortune. She was beautiful, accomplished in all the ways society values, and unfailingly proper." He paused, his fingers absently tracing a pattern on the stone bench. "Our marriage was correct, but not happy," Maris ventured. "Not unhappy," he qualified. "We respected each other, maintained perfect courtesy. When our son was born, we shared genuine joy in his existence, if not in each other." His voice caught slightly. "James would have been 5 this year." Maris felt her heart constrict at the pain evident in his face. "I'm sorry, Rowan, I should not have asked." "No," he said, collecting himself. "You have every right to know. The accident happened on their way to visit Eleanor's sister in Cornwall. The carriage overturned on a rain-slick road. By the time word reached me and I arrived, there was nothing—" He trailed off, unable to complete the sentence. Impulsively, Maris reached for his hand, her fingers closing over his. "And so you ran." "I ran," he admitted. "From duty, from memory, from a life that suddenly seemed hollow without them. I wandered for months before fever took me, and I collapsed at your door." His hand turned beneath hers, their fingers intertwining. "You saved me, Maris. Not just my life, but my reason for living." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. This was the closest they had come to acknowledging the deeper currents that had begun to flow between them. Beyond the practical arrangement of their marriage, beyond the mutual respect that had grown in the face of society's judgment. "I fear I am a poor substitute for what you lost," she said softly. "Not a substitute," Rowan corrected firmly. "A new beginning, one I neither expected nor deserved, but cherish nonetheless." The honesty of his words hung in the air between them, shifting the landscape of their relationship in ways neither could fully comprehend. Maris found herself wondering, not for the first time, what it might be like to truly be his wife in all ways, not just in name. As if reading her thoughts, Rowan's gaze dropped to their joined hands. "I have not pressed you on certain aspects of our marriage. I would not have you feel obligated by the vows we exchanged under such unusual circumstances." "And if it were not obligation?" Maris asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Before Rowan could respond, the moment was shattered by the arrival of Hollins, his usual composure notably disturbed. "Your Grace, forgive the interruption," he said, bowing hastily. "A matter of some urgency has arisen. Lady Seraphine Gloyn's carriage has just arrived, and she insists upon speaking with you immediately. She claims it concerns a matter that cannot wait." Rowan rose, reluctantly releasing Maris's hand. "Did she indicate the nature of this urgent matter?" "No, Your Grace, though she appears determined." Hollins's expression suggested he found Lady Seraphine's determination somewhat alarming. "I shall receive her in the blue salon," Rowan decided. "Maris, will you join me?" Though phrased as a question, Maris understood the request for solidarity. Of course. The blue salon, with its elegant furnishings and serene color palette, seemed at odds with the tension radiating from their unexpected visitor. Lady Seraphine stood by the fireplace, her posture rigid, her normally perfect composure disturbed by some inner agitation. "Lady Seraphine," Rowan greeted her formally, "this is an unexpected pleasure." "I doubt you will find it pleasurable, Rowan," she replied, dispensing with formality. Her gaze flickered to Maris with barely concealed hostility. "What I have to say is perhaps best delivered privately. My wife and I have no secrets from each other," Rowan stated firmly. Lady Seraphine's perfect lips curved into a smile devoid of warmth. "How touching, and how inconvenient, as what I have to say concerns her directly." Maris felt a chill of apprehension. "Then by all means speak freely, Lady Seraphine." The blonde woman reached into her reticule and withdrew a folded paper. "It seems that the story of your romantic meeting has captured society's imagination. So much so that certain inquiries have been made about the new Duchess's background." She unfolded the paper deliberately. "Inquiries that have yielded most interesting results." Rowan stepped forward, his expression darkening. "If you have come to spread malicious gossip—" "Not gossip, Your Grace, fact." Lady Seraphine extended the paper toward him. "Parish records from Moorhollow. It seems your Duchess is not merely a humble seamstress, but the daughter of Elspeth Thorne, a woman known throughout the county for her unconventional morality." Maris felt the blood drain from her face. The truth she had spent a lifetime trying to outrun had finally caught her. "My mother made mistakes," Mary said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "As have we all. I fail to see how her choices reflect upon my character or my marriage." Lady Seraphine's eyebrow arched in mock surprise. "Such composure! But then, you've had a lifetime of practice in presenting a respectable face to the world, haven't you?" Her gaze shifted to Rowan. "Did she tell you, Your Grace, that her mother was the village fallen woman? That our new Duchess is in fact illegitimate?" Rowan's face remained impassive, though Maris detected a slight tension in his jaw. "Lady Seraphine, you have delivered your information. Now I must ask you to leave my home." "Leave? When I've come out of concern for the Valorhart name." Lady Seraphine affected an expression of wounded innocence. "The ton will be abuzz with this by tomorrow. I merely wish to offer you the courtesy of preparation." "How thoughtful," Rowan replied, his voice glacial. "Hollins will show you out." As if summoned by his name, the elderly steward appeared at the salon door, his expression suggesting he had perhaps been listening from just outside. "Lady Seraphine is departing," Rowan announced. With no choice but to retreat, Lady Seraphine gathered her skirts with meticulous dignity. "I do hope you'll reconsider your situation, Rowan," she said, pausing at the door. "There are still options available to you, discreet arrangements that could be made to minimize the scandal." "Good day, Lady Seraphine," was Rowan's only response. When the door closed behind her, a heavy silence descended upon the salon. Maris stood frozen, awaiting the questions, the accusations, perhaps even the recriminations she had feared since the moment they left Moorhollow. "Maris," Rowan began, his voice gentler than she had expected. "Why did you not tell me? Would it have mattered?" she asked quietly. "When we married in the cottage, we were both outcasts in our own way. What purpose would it have served to reveal that my mother had been the village scandal, that I grew up amid whispers and closed doors? It would have allowed me to protect you better against precisely this sort of attack," he replied, moving toward her. Maris stepped back, needing distance to maintain her composure. "I learned long ago that protection is an illusion. One either withstands the storm or breaks beneath it." "You need not weather this alone," Rowan insisted. "But I must," she countered. "Lady Seraphine is right about one thing. By tomorrow, every salon in London will be dissecting my parentage. The illegitimate daughter of a fallen woman, now Duchess of Winthorne. Can you imagine the delight this will bring to those who have been seeking reason to reject me?" Rowan's expression hardened with determination. "Then we shall face them together." "To what end, Rowan?" Maris asked, the strain of the past weeks finally breaking through her careful composure. "How long must we endure the scrutiny, the judgment? How long before you realize that your impulsive decision to bring me here has cost you more than you ever imagined? Is that what you believe? That I regret our marriage?" His voice carried an edge of hurt that cut through her defenses. "I believe you married me out of gratitude and perhaps a desire to escape your grief," she answered honestly. "I believe you are a good man who will honor his vows regardless of the cost. But I cannot bear to be the burden that drags you down in the eyes of your peers." Rowan crossed the distance between them, his hands capturing hers with gentle insistence. "You are not a burden, Maris. You are the breath that restored life to my lungs, the light that guided me home from darkness." The intensity in his eyes made her heart falter. Pretty words do not change ugly truths. The only ugly truth is how long I have hesitated to tell you what grows clearer to me each day, he countered. I did not marry you merely out of gratitude or escape. I married you because even in my brokenness, I recognized something in you that called to the deepest part of myself, and every day since that recognition has deepened into something I can no longer deny. Maris felt tears threatening at the edges of her vision. What are you saying? I'm saying, Maris Thornvale-Hart, that I love you. The words fell between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that changed everything in their path. Not despite who you are or where you come from, but because of the strength and grace those circumstances have forged in you. For a moment, Maris could not speak, overcome by the declaration she had scarcely allowed herself to hope for. When she finally found her voice, it emerged as a whisper. I have loved you since you first opened your eyes in my shop, looking at me as if I were the answer to a question you had been asking all your life. Rowan's hands moved to frame her face, his touch reverent. Then let us face whatever comes together, not as Duke and Duchess alone, but as two hearts bound by choice and affection. As his lips found hers in a kiss that sealed their declaration, Maris felt the last walls around her heart crumble. This was no dutiful gesture between reluctant partners, but the communion of souls who had found in each other the courage to begin anew. The remainder of the day passed in a strange, suspended state, with preparations made for the inevitable social fallout of Lady Seraphine's revelation. Hollins was informed, trusted servants were advised of potential inquiries, and a letter was dispatched to Lord Pemberton, whose influence might help temper the worst of the gossip. That evening, as Maris prepared for bed in her chambers, a soft knock came at the connecting door that separated her rooms from Rowan's, a door that had remained firmly closed since their arrival at Winthorne. Enter, she called, her heart quickening. Rowan appeared, dressed in a simple dressing gown, his expression a mixture of determination and vulnerability that made him appear younger than his years. I thought perhaps we might talk further about our situation. Our situation? Maris echoed, acutely aware of the intimacy of the setting. I have respected the boundaries of our unusual union, he began, remaining near the doorway, but in light of what we face tomorrow, I find myself unwilling to spend another night apart from my wife if she will have me. The directness of his request brought a flush to Maris's cheeks. I would have you, she answered softly, as husband, as companion, as friend. In all ways a wife might have her husband. The words, though simply spoken, carried the weight of a vow more binding than any they had exchanged in the village church. Rowan crossed to her, taking her hands in his. Then let us begin again, he said, not as the broken widower and the compassionate seamstress, nor as the Duke and his unexpected Duchess, but as Rowan and Maris, two souls who have found in each other the courage to love again. That night, in the shelter of each other's arms, they discovered the final transformation of their unlikely union, from arrangement to alliance, from duty to devotion. And as dawn broke over Winthorne Hall, Maris knew that whatever society might throw against them, they would face it with a strength born of true partnership. What shall we do now? She asked, her head resting on Rowan's chest. His fingers traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder. Now, we prepare for battle, but on our terms. The Duchess of Winthorne's garden party, hastily arranged in the face of brewing scandal, represented either the height of audacity or the depth of folly, depending on one's perspective. Invitations were dispatched to every notable family within 50 miles, announcing the event a mere 3 days after Lady Seraphine's revelation had begun circulating through society's drawing rooms. It is madness, Hollins declared as he reviewed the guest list with Maris in the morning room. To invite the very people who are at this moment dissecting your Grace's parentage over their breakfast tables. Perhaps, Maris acknowledged, making a small adjustment to the seating arrangement, but I learned long ago that secrets fester in darkness and wither in light. Let them come, let them see, let them judge openly rather than behind cupped hands. Rowan, entering in time to catch her words, smiled with unmistakable pride. My wife understands the battlefield better than those born to it, he observed. Force your enemy to face you directly rather than strike from shadows. Preparations transformed Winthorne's formal gardens into a spectacle of elegance. Marquees erected on the great lawn, musicians positioned beneath ancient oaks, refreshment tables laden with delicacies from the estate's kitchens. Maris supervised every detail with newfound confidence, drawing on the precision that had once guided her needle through the finest fabrics. "You are changed," Mrs. Penworth remarked as they reviewed the final arrangements. "If I may say so, Your Grace." "Am I?" Maris asked, pausing in her inspection of the floral displays. "You move as if the ground beneath you is solid now," the housekeeper observed, "as if you have found your footing." The observation was astute. In the days since Lady Seraphine's visit, and more significantly, since the night that had transformed her marriage from arrangement to true union, Maris had indeed felt a shift within herself. The fear of discovery that had shadowed her steps had materialized and in doing so had lost much of its power to wound her. The appointed day dawned bright and clear, as if nature itself approved their defiant stand. Maris stood before her mirror as Lily arranged her hair, studying her reflection with critical eyes. The woman who gazed back bore little external resemblance to the seamstress of Moorhollow, yet she recognized in those eyes the same determination that had carried her through years of whispers and closed doors. "You look magnificent," Rowan said from the doorway, resplendent in formal attire that emphasized his ducal bearing. "I look like a duchess," Maris corrected with the ghost of a smile. "You are a duchess," he reminded her, crossing to take her hand, "by law, by marriage, and now by choice and affection." Together they descended to the gardens, where Hollins awaited with barely concealed anxiety. "The first carriages have been sighted on the approach, Your Graces." "Then let us welcome our guests," Rowan replied, offering Maris his arm. They took their position at the entrance to the gardens, a united front against the storm they knew was coming. The first arrivals were their closest neighbours, minor gentry whose expressions betrayed their curiosity, but whose manners remained impeccable. Then came the wider circle of county families, some openly sympathetic, others reserving judgment behind practiced smiles. "Lady Meryton and Mr. Meryton," Hollins announced, as a severe-looking woman approached with her equally austere husband. "Your Grace," Lady Meryton acknowledged Rowan with a slight incline of her head, before turning a measuring gaze on Maris. "Duchess, how kind of you to join us," Maris replied with genuine warmth. "I have so admired the work of your parish charity. Perhaps we might discuss it further over tea sometime." The unexpected overture, addressing directly the charitable work that was Lady Meryton's greatest pride, momentarily disarmed the older woman. "I would be pleased to do so," she managed, before moving on with slightly less rigidity in her spine. "Well played," Rowan murmured as the next guests approached. "I learn quickly," Maris replied. As the gardens filled with the cream of local society, Maris noticed the whispers that followed her progress, no longer behind fans but increasingly open, assessing rather than condemning. She moved among her guests with deliberate grace, refusing to shrink beneath their scrutiny. The arrival of Lord Pemberton caused a stir among those already gathered. The elderly peer, rarely seen at social functions due to his advancing age, had made the journey specifically to demonstrate his support. He made his way directly to Maris, taking her hand with old-world gallantry. "Magnificent display of courage, my dear," he said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Reminds me of my late wife. Never cowered, never apologized for being precisely who she was." His public endorsement, carrying the weight of his impeccable lineage and reputation, shifted the atmosphere perceptibly. Those who had been holding back approached with greater ease, while the openly hostile found themselves increasingly isolated. The pivotal moment came with the unexpected arrival of Lady Seraphine, her entrance calculated for maximum effect as she swept into the gardens at the height of the gathering. Conversation dimmed as she approached Rowan and Maris, her smile a perfect blend of social correctness and predatory intent. "Your Grace," she acknowledged Rowan, before turning a glacial gaze on Maris. "Duchess, how brave of you to host such an event under the circumstances." "Brave," Maris echoed with deliberate innocence. "I merely wish to share the beauty of Winthorne with our neighbours. After all, a duchess's first duty is to her community, is it not?" "Indeed," Lady Seraphine agreed, her smile tightening, "though one wonders what lessons in duty might be learned from one whose own mother was so notably undutiful." A hush fell over the nearby guests, the challenge laid bare for all to witness. Maris felt Rowan tense beside her, ready to intervene, but she placed a restraining hand on his arm. This was her battle to fight. "My mother made choices that society condemned," Maris acknowledged, her voice clear and steady. "Yet she taught me that true duty lies not in conforming to others' expectations, but in living with integrity according to one's own conscience. A convenient philosophy for those born outside the bounds of propriety," Lady Seraphine countered. "Perhaps," Maris agreed unexpectedly. Just as rigid adherence to propriety is convenient for those who have never had to question its cost. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a tone of confidential sincerity. Tell me, Lady Seraphine, have you ever wondered what freedom might taste like? To choose one's path based on the heart's wisdom rather than society's dictates. The question, posed without malice but with genuine curiosity, struck at the core of Lady Seraphine's carefully constructed existence. For an instant, something like uncertainty flickered in her perfect features. "I have always done what was expected of me," she replied stiffly. "As have I," Maris said gently, though what was expected of the illegitimate daughter of Moor Hollow's seamstress was very different from what was expected of the Earl of Sheffington's daughter. Yet here we stand, both having arrived at this moment by following the paths laid before us. The humanity in her response, the recognition of their shared experience despite vastly different circumstances, undermined Lady Seraphine's attack more effectively than any direct confrontation could have done. With nothing left to say that would not diminish her further in the eyes of watching society, Lady Seraphine executed a perfect curtsy. "I wish you joy of your unconventional path, Duchess," she said, the words formal but no longer barbed with malice. "If you will excuse me, I believe Lord Pemberton is signalling for my attention." As she glided away, Rowan's hand found Maris's, squeezing gently in silent support and admiration. "You disarmed her more thoroughly than any cutting remark could have done," he observed. "Because I meant what I said," Maris replied. "We are not so different, she and I, both shaped by circumstances beyond our control, both seeking security in an uncertain world." The remainder of the garden party unfolded with a gathering warmth, as if Maris's graceful handling of her most vocal critic had given others permission to accept her on her own merits. By the time the last guests departed as twilight descended, the battle they had feared had transformed into something approaching triumph. "You have won them," Hollands declared as he supervised the dismantling of the marquees. "Not all, perhaps, but enough to secure your position." "Not my position," Maris corrected, watching as lanterns were lit along the garden paths. "Our future." Later, as she and Rowan walked arm in arm through the quiet gardens, stars emerging in the deepening blue above them, he stopped beneath the ancient oak that had witnessed generations of Valhart celebrations and sorrows. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. "Something I've carried since the day I first opened my eyes to find you tending my fever." He placed in her palm a small copper thimble, her mother's thimble, which she had worn around her neck until it disappeared during her first days at Winthorne. "I took it," Rowan confessed, "not to deprive you of your talisman, but because when my fever broke and I saw you sleeping in the chair beside me, the thimble caught the morning light. I kept it as a reminder that beauty and care can exist even in the darkest moments." Maris closed her fingers around the familiar object, tears threatening at the unexpected sentiment. "I thought it lost." "Never lost," he assured her, his hand covering hers, "merely waiting to be returned when we both understood its true value." In that moment, beneath the ancient oak with stars emerging above them, the Duke and Duchess of Winthorne sealed their unlikely union with a kiss that promised not merely survival in the face of society's judgment, but triumph through the power of authentic love. Autumn descended upon Winthorne with a painter's palette, russet and gold spreading across the ancient oaks, crimson vines climbing stone walls that had witnessed centuries of Valahart history. Within those walls, the Duke and Duchess settled into a rhythm that defied society's expectations, building a life based not on precedent, but on the genuine affection that had blossomed between them. 3 months after the garden party that had secured Maris's position, she sat in her private study, a room that had once been Eleanor's but now bore the unmistakable touches of its new mistress. Sketches for estate improvements lined the walls, ledgers detailing the household accounts rested on her desk, and in the corner stood a small work-basket containing the fine needlework she still pursued in quiet moments. A gentle knock interrupted her review of the estate's charity expenditures. "Enter," she called, expecting Lily or perhaps Mrs. Penworth with afternoon tea. Instead, Rowan appeared, his expression betraying an unusual combination of excitement and trepidation. "Maris, I wondered if you might accompany me on a short journey. There's something I wish to show you." "Now?" she asked, glancing at the work before her. "The ledgers will wait," he replied with a smile. "This will not." Intrigued, Maris followed him to where a carriage awaited in the courtyard. The day was crisp but pleasant, the autumn sun warming the air despite the season's advance. As they settled into their seats, She noted that Rowan had not informed her of their destination. "A mystery outing?" she inquired. Her curiosity piqued. "Of a sort," he acknowledged, though perhaps better described as a long-overdue introduction. The carriage travelled beyond the immediate grounds of Winthorne, following country lanes that wound through the Duke's extensive lands. After nearly an hour, they turned onto a tree-lined drive, leading to a handsome stone house, smaller than the Great Hall but still substantial, with well-tended gardens and an air of comfortable prosperity. "Briarwood Cottage," Rowan explained as the carriage slowed, though cottage is a rather modest description for a house with 12 bedrooms. "It's lovely," Maris observed. "Is it part of the estate holdings?" "It is the traditional dower house of Winthorne," he replied, "where dowager duchesses typically reside after their sons inherit the title." Before Maris could inquire further, the carriage halted before the entrance. A dignified woman in her 6th decade emerged from the house, her silver-streaked dark hair arranged in an elegant knot, her bearing reminiscent of Rowan's own natural grace. "Mother," Rowan said, as he handed Maris down from the carriage, "may I present my wife, Maris? Maris, this is the Dowager Duchess of Winthorne, Lady Emmeline Veilhart." Maris felt her heart falter. In all their time together, Rowan had mentioned his mother only in passing, explaining that she had chosen to live quietly at the dower house after his father's death. There had been no hint of introducing them, an omission Maris had attributed to shame over his unconventional choice of bride. "Your Grace," she said, dropping into a perfect curtsy. "My dear," Lady Emmeline replied, her voice warm and cultured, "how pleased I am to finally meet the woman who restored my son to himself." She extended her hands, drawing Maris up and examining her with keen eyes that missed nothing. "Yes, I see exactly why he chose you." "Mother has been abroad," Rowan explained, noting Maris's confusion. "She returned to England only yesterday. I wished you to meet as soon as possible." Lady Emmeline linked her arm through Maris's, leading her toward the house with easy familiarity. "Come inside, my dear. We have much to discuss, and Rowan tells me you've been reforming his household accounts with remarkable efficiency. I should like to hear all about it." The interior of Briarwood Cottage reflected its mistress's refined taste, elegant without ostentation, comfortable without sacrificing beauty. Lady Emmeline settled them in a sunny drawing room, overlooking gardens that still showed touches of late-season colour. "I must apologize for my absence during these crucial early months of your marriage," she said, as tea was served by an elderly butler. "Had I known Rowan had returned, and with a bride no less, I would have cut short my visit to Florence immediately." "I did not wish to disrupt your first extended holiday since Father's passing," Rowan explained, "and there was, admittedly, some confusion regarding my own circumstances." Lady Emmeline's eyebrow arched in a gesture so reminiscent of her son that Maris could not suppress a smile. "Confusion? Is that what we're calling your disappearance and subsequent return with a village seamstress as your duchess?" Despite the directness of her words, her tone held no judgment, only a mother's exasperated affection. "The Tun has been most inventive in their embellishments," Maris acknowledged, finding herself drawn to the older woman's frankness. "The Tun," Lady Emmeline said dismissively, "has nothing better to occupy their minds than the fabrication of scandals to enliven their dreary existence. I have ignored their opinions for 40 years, and am far too old to begin caring now." She turned her penetrating gaze fully on Maris. "Hollins writes to me regularly. He speaks most highly of your management of Winthorne and your dignity in the face of certain challenges." Maris set down her teacup carefully. "You refer to my birth." "I refer to Lady Seraphine's deplorable attempt to undermine you," Lady Emmeline corrected. "Your birth is a circumstance, not a character flaw, and having raised this occasionally stubborn son of mine, I assure you that character is what matters in sustaining a marriage and managing a dukedom." The blunt assessment, delivered with such casual certainty, swept away the last lingering fear that had haunted Maris, that Rowan's family would reject her, forcing him to choose between duty and affection. "Thank you," she said simply, "for stating the obvious." Lady Emmeline smiled. "My dear, if you've succeeded in bringing my son back from whatever darkness consumed him after the accident, you have my eternal gratitude. The title, the estate, the lineage, these things matter, of course, but they mean nothing without the heart to steward them properly." As afternoon stretched toward evening, the three talked with increasing ease. Lady Emmeline shared stories of Rowan's childhood that made him wince and Maris laugh, while Maris described their unconventional meeting and the subsequent journey that had brought them together. By the time they rose to depart, A genuine warmth had developed between the two women. "So you will come for dinner next week," Lady Emmeline declared as they prepared to leave, "and perhaps we might discuss opening the Winthorne Hospital wing that has stood empty since my husband's time. Hollins mentions you have quite progressive ideas about providing care for estate workers and their families." "I would like that very much," Maris replied, touched by the inclusion in family matters. As they travelled back to Winthorne Hall in the gathering dusk, Maris turned to Rowan with newfound understanding. "She is remarkable." "She is," he agreed, "and not unlike you in certain respects. Clear-sighted, practical, and unafraid to speak truth regardless of consequence." "Why did you wait so long to introduce us?" Maris asked. Rowan's expression grew thoughtful, partly because of her absence abroad, but, if I am honest, partly from fear. "Fear?" she echoed, surprised. "That she would see in you everything I had lost in Eleanor. Warmth, authenticity, genuine partnership. That she would make me confront how hollow my first marriage had been beneath its perfect surface." He took her hand, his thumb tracing the contours of her palm. "I needed to accept that truth myself before I could bear to see it reflected in her eyes." The confession, delivered with such quiet vulnerability, reminded Maris how far they had travelled from the broken widower and compassionate seamstress who had exchanged vows in Moor Hollow's humble church. Their journey had transformed them both. Him from a man fleeing his past to one embracing a future he had never imagined. Her from a woman defined by circumstance to one who defined herself through choice and conviction. As Winthorne Hall came into view, its windows glowing with welcome against the twilight sky, Maris felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This place, once so intimidating in its grandeur, so foreign to her experience, had become home, not because of its beauty or status, but because within its walls she had found her truest self and her deepest love. "What are you thinking?" Rowan asked, noting her contemplative silence. "That sometimes," Maris replied, "the most unexpected journeys lead us precisely where we need to be." Winter descended upon Winthorne with crystalline beauty, frost etching delicate patterns on window panes, snow transforming the formal gardens into a landscape of pristine white. Within the great house, preparations for Christmas brought a festive air that had been absent during Rowan's years of grief and subsequent disappearance. The last Valhart Christmas celebration was held the year before the accident, Hollins explained as Maris reviewed plans for the traditional gathering of tenants, staff, and neighbouring gentry. "It has been sorely missed." "Then we shall ensure this one compensates for the years without celebration," Maris decided. "Has Lady Emmeline been consulted regarding the traditional observances?" "Indeed, Your Grace. She provided extensive notes and has offered to oversee the arrangement of the Great Hall if you approve." "I welcome her guidance," Maris assured him. "This is her family's history we are honouring." In the weeks leading up to the holiday, Winthorne hummed with activity. Boughs of evergreen and holly festooned the halls, kitchens produced mountains of traditional delicacies, and lists of guests and gifts grew under Maris's careful supervision. She found unexpected joy in these preparations, recognizing that she was not merely preserving tradition, but helping to rebuild something precious that had been broken. One morning, as snow fell in gentle curtains outside the library windows, Rowan found her poring over estate maps with unusual intensity. "Have we territorial disputes I should know about?" he inquired, bending to kiss her forehead. "Not disputes," Maris replied, "but perhaps an opportunity." She indicated a section of land near the village of Moor Hollow. "This parcel has lain fallow for nearly a decade, according to the ledgers. I wondered if it might serve a better purpose." Rowan studied the map with interest. "What did you have in mind?" "A school," Maris said, a hint of hesitancy in her voice, "for girls from the surrounding villages, particularly those whose circumstances might otherwise limit their opportunities." Understanding dawned in Rowan's eyes. "Girls like you once were." "Yes," she admitted, "girls who might become seamstresses or laundresses or scullery maids, or who might, with proper education, discover talents that could lead them in directions they never imagined possible." Rowan's hand covered hers where it rested on the map. "I think it's an excellent proposal. The Duchess of Winthorne's School for Girls has a fine sound to it." "You don't think it presumptuous?" Maris asked. "Using the Duchy's resources for such a personal project?" "I think it precisely what those resources are meant for," he countered. "The privilege of our position carries with it responsibility to improve the lives of those under our care. What better way than to offer opportunity where circumstance has denied it?" The warmth of his support reinforced what Maris had come to understand in her months as Duchess. that true nobility lay not in bloodlines or titles, but in the generosity of spirit that sought to lift others. It was this quality that had drawn her to Rowan even when he appeared as nothing more than a broken widower in need of care. "I shall begin drafting a proper proposal," she said, her enthusiasm growing. "Perhaps Lady Emmeline might offer insights from her work with the hospital wing." "She would be delighted," Rowan assured her. "Though I warn you, once engaged in a project, my mother can be rather formidable." Maris laughed. "I believe I can manage one formidable Valhard woman, having successfully tamed another." Christmas Eve arrived with perfect theatrical timing, snow falling just heavily enough to transform the landscape without impeding travel, fires crackling in every hearth, and the scent of pine and cinnamon perfuming the air. The great hall of Winthorne, decorated according to traditions dating back generations, welcomed guests from every stratum of local society. Tenants and their families mingled with neighboring gentry. Estate workers shared benches with village merchants, and at the center of it all, the Duke and Duchess of Winthorne presided with warmth that dissolved the usual rigid boundaries of class and station. "You have accomplished a minor miracle," Lady Emmeline observed as she joined Maris in surveying the festive gathering. "Winthorne has not seen such genuine celebration in many years, not even before the tragedy." Maris glanced at her mother-in-law curiously. Was there no joy in Rowan's first marriage? Lady Emmeline considered her answer carefully. There was correctness, propriety, fulfillment of duty. Eleanor was perfect in all the ways society values perfection, but perfect things can be cold, my dear. What you have brought to my son and to Winthorne is warmth. Across the hall, Rowan stood in conversation with a group of tenant farmers, his face animated in a way that still surprised those who had known him in his earlier life. Sensing Maris's gaze, he looked up, his eyes finding hers with unerring precision. The connection between them, visible to all who observed it, required no words or gestures to convey its depth. "Ah," Lady Emmeline said softly, "there it is, the thing I most wished for him and feared he would never find." "What is that?" Maris asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "Love that transforms rather than merely decorates a life," the older woman replied. "My husband and I were blessed with such a bond. I had begun to fear that Rowan would never know its power." As midnight approached, traditional carols gave way to quieter reflection. Rowan rose to address the gathered company, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. "For too many years, Winthorne has stood in shadow," he began. "First in grief, then in absence. Tonight marks not merely a return to tradition, but the beginning of a new chapter in the legacy of this house and these lands." His gaze found Maris, and he extended his hand toward her. "A chapter made possible by the courage and compassion of the woman who now stands as your Duchess. She came to Winthorne as a stranger to our ways, yet she has embraced not only the responsibilities of her position, but the hearts of all who call this place home." Maris rose to join him, her simple gown of deep crimson velvet a striking contrast to the traditional finery of duchesses past. Yet as she took Rowan's hand, the rightness of her place beside him was evident to all who witnessed it. "Together," Rowan continued, "we pledge to honor the past while building a future worthy of your trust and loyalty. May this Christmas be the first of many, where Winthorne stands as a beacon of hope and community for all who shelter beneath its care." The hall erupted in approval, the genuine affection of those gathered a testament to how thoroughly the unlikely Duchess had won their hearts. As the clock struck midnight, Rowan bent to kiss his wife in full view of the assembly, a gesture that would once have been considered too intimate for public display, but now seemed the perfect embodiment of the authentic spirit they had brought to Winthorne. Later, as the celebration continued and midnight gave way to the early hours of Christmas Day, Maris slipped away to the quiet sanctuary of the Duchess's garden. Though dormant under winter's touch, the herb beds and rose trellises held the promise of renewal with spring's return. Seeking solitude, Rowan's voice came from behind her as he followed her path through the snow. "Seeking a moment to remember," she replied, turning to face him. The moonlight silvered his features, reminding her of the broken man she had first encountered in Moor Hollow. "To remember how far we have come." He joined her beneath the bare branches of the rose arbor, snowflakes catching in his dark hair. "From a fever-stricken widower and a compassionate seamstress to this," he mused. "Who could have foreseen it?" "Perhaps no one," Maris acknowledged. "Yet here we stand, exactly where we were meant to be." Rowan reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small package wrapped in silver paper. "I have a gift for you, one that could not wait for morning's exchange of presents." Maris accepted it with curiosity, carefully unwrapping the delicate paper to reveal a jeweller's box. Inside, nestled on black velvet, lay a gold locket of exquisite workmanship. At its centre, set in a circle of tiny pearls, was her mother's copper thimble, transformed from humble tool to treasured ornament. "Rowan," she breathed, touched beyond words by the symbolism of the gift. "Open it," he urged gently. She pressed the catch, and the locket sprang open to reveal a miniature portrait on one side, a perfect likeness of Rowan, and an inscription on the other. "From broken to whole, from hidden to revealed, from alone to beloved. It is perfect," Maris whispered, tears threatening despite her joy, a reminder of everything that brought us together. Rowan fastened the locket around her neck, his fingers lingering on the delicate chain. "Not merely a reminder of the past," he corrected, "but a promise for our future, one we build together, stitch by careful stitch, day by patient day." As snowflakes danced around them in the quiet garden, the Duke and Duchess of Winthorne sealed their Christmas covenant with a kiss that spoke of journeys completed and journeys yet to begin. A seamstress and a broken widower who had found in each other the courage to become whole again. Spring came early to Winthorne the following year, as if nature itself celebrated the renewal that had transformed the ancient estate. Apple blossoms frosted the orchards, daffodils carpeted the woodland walks, and in the Duchess's garden, the first roses unfurled tender petals beneath Maris's attentive care. "You have your mother's touch with growing things," Lady Emmeline observed as they inspected the newly planted medicinal herbs that would supply the recently reopened hospital wing. Elspeth Thorne was known for her garden before circumstances altered her path. Maris looked up in surprise. "You knew my mother?" "Our paths crossed when I was a young duchess," Lady Emmeline replied, adjusting her gardening gloves. "She supplied the hall with exceptional embroidery work before you were born. A woman of remarkable talent and unfortunate choices." The casual revelation that her mother had once been connected, however tenuously, to the great house where Maris now presided as Duchess, seemed fitting in a tale already woven with threads of coincidence and destiny. "Life moves in circles we cannot anticipate," Maris mused, gently touching a budding rose. "My mother would never have imagined her daughter as mistress of Winthorne. Yet here you stand," Lady Emmeline said with satisfaction, "precisely where you were meant to be." The Duchess of Winthorne's School for Girls had opened its doors with the coming of spring, a modest beginning with 20 pupils from surrounding villages, selected not for their social standing, but for their eagerness to learn. Maris visited weekly, teaching not only needlework but the principles of household management and basic accounting that had served her so well in assuming her unexpected role. "Miss Harper shows remarkable aptitude for figures," she reported to Rowan after one such visit, "and little Emma Caldwell has a natural eye for design that could lead to a promising career as a dressmaker, given proper training." Rowan, reviewing estate ledgers at his desk, smiled at his wife's enthusiasm. "Perhaps we should consider expanding the curriculum to include art and mathematics." "Already arranged," Maris replied with a twinkle in her eye. "Lady Pemberton has agreed to fund an additional teacher for those subjects. It seems her grandfather was a self-made man who began as a blacksmith's apprentice. She feels a certain kinship with our mission." Such developments had become commonplace in the year since their return to Winthorne. Under Maris's guidance, the estate had developed new initiatives that honored tradition while embracing innovation. A hospital wing staffed with trained nurses, agricultural improvements that increased yields while reducing tenants' labor, apprenticeship programs that offered village youth paths to skilled trades. The Tun, initially scandalized by the Duke's unconventional marriage, had gradually shifted from outright opposition to reluctant acceptance and, in some quarters, genuine admiration. Lady Seraphine had departed for an extended stay in Italy shortly after Christmas, though rumors suggested her retreat had more to do with a growing attachment to an American businessman than with any lingering mortification over her failed campaign against the Duchess. Society, as it always did, had adapted to the new reality, particularly when that reality was backed by one of the oldest titles in England and a fortune substantial enough to withstand even the most determined social opposition. On a perfect May morning, with sunlight streaming through the windows of the Duchess's private sitting room, Maris stood contemplating her reflection in a full-length mirror. Her figure, still slender, but with a new fullness to her breasts and a gentle rounding of her abdomen, told a story that would soon become impossible to conceal. "Admiring the view?" Rowan's voice came from the doorway, his tone warm with affection. "Considering the changes," she replied, turning to face him. "Doctor, Preston confirms what we suspected. Winthorne will have an heir by autumn's end." The joy that transformed Rowan's features was unlike anything Maris had witnessed, even in their most intimate moments. He crossed the room in 3 strides, gathering her into an embrace that conveyed emotion beyond words. "Are you pleased?" she asked, though his reaction left little doubt. "Pleased?" he echoed, drawing back to meet her gaze. "Maris, you have given me life twice over. First when you saved me from fever and despair, and now as you carry the future of Winthorne beneath your heart." He placed his hand gently on the subtle curve of her abdomen, as if establishing connection with the new life growing within. "Boy or girl, this child will inherit more than a title and estate. They will inherit the story of how love transcends all boundaries society erects between souls meant to find each other." That evening, a small gathering assembled in the private dining room to receive the news. Lady Emmeline, whose delight manifested in immediate plans for the nursery's renovation. Hollins, whose usual composure briefly cracked to reveal genuine emotion. Mrs. Penworth, whose practical nature immediately turned to considerations of appropriate staff, and Lord Pemberton, invited as the couple's most steadfast ally, who proposed the first toast to the future Marquis or Lady of Winthorne. As spring deepened towards summer, Maris found herself drawn increasingly to the small study adjoining the Duchess's bedroom, a space she had claimed as her own and furnished with objects meaningful to her journey. There, alongside the ledgers and correspondence that occupied her mornings, she had begun a project of personal significance. With the same skill that had once supported her modest existence as a village seamstress, she worked on a christening gown, the finest she had ever attempted. Delicate whitework embroidery adorned the hem and bodice, incorporating subtle motifs that told the story of the child's heritage. Tiny thimbles representing Maris's origins, miniature oak leaves for the ancient trees of Winthorne, a barely perceptible phoenix rising from ashes to symbolize Rowan's return from grief. "A masterpiece," Rowan declared, when she finally showed him the completed garment. "Though I would expect nothing less from your hands. It contains everything that matters," Maris explained, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns. "Where we began, what we overcame, what we built together. I want our child to wear the story of their beginning against their skin, just as we carry our story in everything we do," Rowan agreed, his hand finding the locket that rarely left Maris's neck, the transformed thimble that symbolized their unlikely journey. As summer reached its zenith, the Duke and Duchess celebrated their first formal anniversary with an intimate gathering at Briarwood Cottage, Lady Emmeline's domain. The setting was deliberate, a middle ground between the grand formality of Winthorne Hall and the humble simplicity of the cottage in Moorhollow where their union had begun. Under a canopy of flowering trees, with only their closest allies in attendance, Rowan and Maris renewed the vows they had first exchanged as seeming strangers, now infused with the deeper meaning that comes from genuine knowledge and tested love. "I take you, Maris Thorne Veilhart," Rowan declared, his voice carrying to every corner of the garden, "not as the broken widower seeking shelter, but as the man you helped me become, whole, present, and eternally grateful for the gift of second chances." "I take you, Rowan Veilhart," Maris responded, one hand resting on her growing abdomen, "not as the seamstress reaching beyond her station, but as the woman you helped me discover, capable, worthy, and forever thankful for the love that saw beyond circumstance to possibility." As twilight descended and lanterns illuminated the garden, transforming it into a realm of golden light and soft shadow, the small assembly raised glasses to honor not merely a marriage, but a transformation of 2 individuals, of a great estate, of the very definition of what constitutes true nobility. Standing among those who had witnessed their journey from its most challenging moments to this pinnacle of joy, the Duke and Duchess of Winthorne embodied a truth that transcended the rigid boundaries of Victorian society, that authentic love recognizes no distinction of rank or birth, that the heart's wisdom often defies convention's narrow limitations, and that sometimes the most beautiful patterns emerge from threads that seemed, at first glance, mismatched. Later, as stars appeared in the velvet darkness above Briarwood's gardens, Rowan and Maris stood alone by the small ornamental pond, their reflections rippling in its surface. The Duke's hand rested protectively over his wife's, which in turn cradled the promise of their future. "Did you ever imagine," Maris asked softly, "when you collapsed at my door in Moorhollow that we would stand here thus, Duke and Duchess, husband and wife?" future parents. Never, Rowan admitted, his voice tender with memory and anticipation. Yet I cannot imagine standing anywhere else or with anyone but you. The seamstress who wed a broken widower, only to learn the man she saved was the Duke in disguise, had found her true place, not in the title bestowed by marriage, but in the authentic partnership they had forged through trials and triumphs. And as the heir to Winthorne grew beneath her heart, Maris understood that the greatest inheritance she could offer this child was not the legacy of ancient bloodlines, but the example of a love strong enough to transcend every boundary society might erect between souls destined to find each other. In the tapestry of life, it is not the threads of circumstance that determine our worth, but the patterns we choose to create with them. Maris and Rowan's journey reminds us that true nobility springs not from titles or bloodlines, but from the courage to see beyond society's narrow definitions to the authentic heart that beats within each soul. Their story teaches us that healing often comes from the most unexpected sources, that sometimes we must lose everything we thought defined us to discover who we truly are. In Maris's humble compassion and Rowan's willingness to be vulnerable, we find the transformative power of love that values character above station, truth above appearance, and genuine connection above social convention. Perhaps most importantly, this tale reminds us that our origins need not determine our destinations. The seamstress became a duchess not merely through marriage, but through her innate dignity, wisdom, and strength. The Duke found salvation not in his title or wealth, but in the honest recognition of his own brokenness and the courage to begin anew. In a world that often judges by external measures, may we all find the vision to recognize, as Rowan did, that the most precious gifts may come in the most humble packages, and the wisdom to understand, as Maris discovered, that our greatest power lies not in conforming to others' expectations, but in remaining true to our authentic selves. For in the end, it is not who we were born to be, but who we choose to become through love, courage, and compassion that writes our true legacy in the hearts of those whose lives we touch. Dear listeners, if this tale of unexpected love and transformation touched your heart, we invite you to join our community of romantic souls. Subscribe to Victorian Romance, audio stories for more tales where love defies convention, courage overcomes circumstance, and true hearts find each other against all odds. Did Maris and Rowan's journey move you? Perhaps you found yourself holding your breath during Lady Seraphine's revelations, or felt your heart swell when the thimble became a locket, a symbol of how love transforms the ordinary into the extraordinary. Share your favorite moment in the comments below, and connect with others who find hope and inspiration in these timeless stories. Remember, each time you like, subscribe, and share our stories, you help us continue crafting these emotional journeys that remind us of love's transformative power. Join us next week for another tale where passion meets propriety, and hearts find their true home in the most unexpected places. With deepest gratitude from all of us at Victorian Romance, Audio Stories, thank you for allowing us to be part of your day. Until our next journey together, may you find beauty in every stitch of your own unfolding story.